Australia, of course, is a land of enormous biodiversity. Sure, life here is hard, but the diversity on this continent is truly astonishing. We're one of 8 mega-diverse regions on the planet. Part of the reason for that is that some of our poorest environments have an extraordinary abundance of species that results from that system I mentioned earlier of one species working with another to create more than the sum of its parts. In the wheat belt area of Western Australia, where the soil is pretty much pure sand, we find a biodiversity of plants that rivals that of rainforests elsewhere overseas. On the east coast, up and down our mountain range, we find biodiversity that is not only huge in terms of numbers, but incredibly ancient. And part of the reason it's been able to persist is that as Australia has moved northwards over the last 40 million years, and this continent has slowly drifted north across the Southern Ocean at the rate of about 8 centimetres per year. It's about half as fast as your hair grows. But as it's moved north, the Earth has also cooled, and they've roughly matched each other, the speed of the drift north and the rate of cooling of our planet, providing a sort of an arc, if you want, for a lot of species with very specific habitat requirements. And so up and down Australia's east coast, you'll find species with very specific habitat requirements surviving, often clinging to mountaintops where they would otherwise be gone. I think those points just reinforce again the nature of the challenges we face in Australia. Enormous biodiversity, enormous ecosystem fragility, ancient ecosystems that are somehow having to coexist with a species that's hungry for resources, that is also changing the nature of our atmosphere, which is leading to climate change. All of those things together represent an enormous challenge. And I think that in this paradigm that you're examining today of healthy parks and healthy people, we may start seeing some solutions, because the solutions don't just lie within the park system, they have to lie within a broader engagement because of the complexity of things. I think it's probably worth just throwing out 2 lines as we consider this. You know, one is that everything is genuinely connected to everything else on our planet. And the other great line I love is Bobby Kennedy's one, you know, of ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Because all too often, as we consider parks, biodiversity and so forth, we ask what it can do for us. We don't ask, and during the budget round we almost never ask what we can do for our country. And that again is part of the problem, that we in the context of environment agencies and parks agencies we sort of occupy a downstream place in the whole budget process. One which is often cut because most of our constituents can't vote. The bandicoots and wallabies and stuff can't vote, so, you know, we're seen as a bit expendable. And this concept of healthy parks, healthy people, I think is a very potentially powerful tool to re-engage with the upstream end of that and to say, hey, no, we actually are important. And what we do has critical value. If we don't get this right in the next few decades, I can see us being placed in ever more difficult and disempowered positions. You can, as you watch what climate change is doing to our planet, and the evidence for climate change here in Australia is particularly compelling, you can see that we don't have a lot of time to manage our biodiversity. All of those species that cling to mountain summits up and down the east coast are under threat. The cool habitats that exist at the top of the mountains may not be there in decades to come as our Earth warms. And could I just say that from a climate science perspective, that is one of the certainties. We know that at the end of the last ice age, the planet warmed by about 5 degrees. Tree lines in the Australian tropics rose by, well, in just north of Australia, rose by 2,000 metres. Yeah? So we can measure, we know what's going to happen. We know that the mountain pygmy possum, the broad-toothed rat, the Antarctic beach and all these ancient elements of our biodiversity are under direct threat from climate change. And yet there is nothing that we as parks people can do about that in isolation. This is a profound problem of sustainability whose solutions lie outside our realm, at least in part, or by and large I should say. And yet we carry the responsibility. And one reason I didn't want to talk to you endlessly about climate change this morning is that I know how disempowering that is, because you are the people saddled with the responsibility for managing the situation, and yet you have almost none of the resources or tools that are required in order to deal adequately with the problem. And perhaps that's another strand that Healthy Parks and Healthy People can start drawing out, looking at the carbon cycle, trying to explain to people that, that carbon exists as a store in living things, a very valuable store in living things, that plants actually suck the stuff out of the atmosphere. And there's a very powerful argument to be made there, that plants every year draw down 8% of all atmospheric carbon dioxide. That's marine and terrestrial plants. If we can strengthen the power of our ecosystems, strengthen the life force of the planet, we can deal with climate change. It's not a hopeless case, but we need to do that in a holistic and integrated way, in a way that recognises all of the links between us and our health, the planet's health, our parks, and so forth. National parks and other sort of parks that don't address those issues of ecosystem diversity and resilience, biodiversity, the carbon cycle and so forth, are sort of, they're sick shadows really, that will inevitably lose their biodiversity, particularly in a place like Australia. And because everything is so tightly connected to everything else here, as we pull species out, we will see consequences. We may not see them immediately. It may be that the gum trees have a life cycle that's 300 or 400 or 500 years, and it may take that long for the full consequences of extinctions in parks to wash their way through the system. But those consequences are still there in potential as we move through. I guess my special area and my special plea does concern that biodiversity aspects of our parks. Some parks, sure, are good recreation areas, great places for people just to go and enjoy a bit of green space. They can also be the place where we connect at a very deep level with our life support system on Earth. And I think that if we get that right, we'll rise to this challenge of seeing a sustainable future where we do have a truly healthy population, truly healthy parks, and a truly healthy planet as a whole. So I wish you all the very best in your endeavours over the next few days, and I hope that you become empowered through the process. Thank you.
Tim.